Welcome to Groups This Week. As a church, we exist to help all people become fully devoted followers of Jesus. We believe doing life together is a crucial part of that journey. During this time, we're going to unpack and dig deeper into the sermon we heard this past week. Let's dive in as we continue to grow in our faith, knowledge, and love of Jesus together.
Well, hey, community groups, welcome. This past weekend, we started a new series on the book of 1 John. But before we actually jump into 1 John, speaking of series, David, your Toronto Maple Leafs are in a series against the Bruins, and they're playing Game 6 tonight. We're recording on Thursday morning.
Yes.
So I want to ask you, what's your prediction for tonight's game?
Well, you know, one of the themes in 1 John is faith, right? And so I have faith. Not a lot. It could be blind faith,
all right,
but I have faith that
mustard seed.
Yeah, so also mustard seed. So I mean, two things. one is I have faith, and two, I'm well acquainted with suffering.
All right,
and so I kind of expect them to go out, but I hope they don't.
Okay, all right. Yeah, and I mean the Canucks play tomorrow. Game 6 against.
You probably have more faith. Yeah,
Friday night. I'm gonna say 3-2 Canucks win. And Quinn Hughes with the winner. That's my prediction.
Wow.
By the time
we see if he has prophetic gifts. That's good.
We'll see. By the time you watch this, you'll know. But anyways, we'll get into 1 John. So we started this series this past weekend. You opened us up at Mariner. And we were looking at kind of the first 4 verses in 1 John to kind of open up the book. But I wanted to start by asking, why are we doing this book in the first place? Why did we choose this specific book to look through?
Yeah, it's actually a good question. I mean, it's one of those books, like first, especially 2nd and 3rd John. My guess is that unless you have a yearly Bible reading, you're not going to read through these letters very often. But then we're missing, a treasure because these letters are really important. They're one of 5 contributions that John the Apostle makes to the Bible. You have the Gospel of John, and we're quite familiar with that. We walked through the prologue as a sermon series not that long ago. And so that deals with John's memory of the past, of him encountering Jesus and what that was like. And then there's another book that John writes, which is Revelation. And in many ways, that points to the future. It points to, the return of the King, the return of Jesus. And then you get this nitty-gritty life in the church. And that's where 1 John, 2 John, and 3 John are so important. Because it's been a couple generations since Jesus' ascension. And John is leading the church, probably in Asia Minor, probably around 80, 85 AD. And he's dealing with some of the challenges that are showing up in the church. And I think there's a lot in this that's going to speak to us as a church at this time,
So what are some of those things that are showing up? Why does he write this book? And what are kind of some of the issues that are addressed?
Yeah, I think John writes this for 1 John for a number of reasons. One, there's a doctrinal reason. You have a church that's, maybe starting to get a little complacent, and they're open to new ideas, but these ideas are quite dangerous. There's a lot of false teaching that's going on in the church, and John is addressing this. And the false teaching, really interesting, concerns the person of Jesus. Who is Jesus? Which may be a question that a lot of people have today. And it is something that I think 1 John can speak to our own context. The other thing, John has some ethical concerns. And apparently in the church, now this may come as a shock, but there was hypocrisy in the church. Yes, there was. I know. It sounds shocking. Can you imagine? But you have a lot of people who are saying that they love Jesus, saying that they love their neighbors, but in reality, we're acting quite hateful towards their neighbor, and John's calling them on that, and he's calling them back to the love of God and our call to love one another in the church. So there's an ethical reason, and then there's just this pastoral reason. His point is that in Jesus we can experience incredible fellowship with one another and fellowship with God. And so he's calling the church back to this deep, deep joy that is on offer in and through Jesus Christ. And so that's why he gives us this letter. Yeah.
Okay. So doctrinal, ethical, and pastoral.
Pastoral.
Wow.
Yeah, there's probably a few others.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, those sound like really relevant things even for today.
For sure.
And so, like, do you see some of these themes and issues popping up today, maybe in slightly different ways or maybe in the exact same way? Yeah, how does this book kind of intersect with like our day-to-day in the 21st century?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's in the Christian life, it's easy to grow complacent. So right there's a connecting point. In the Christian life, it's easy to start looking around at new ideas and losing our mooring and losing our true north. You know what I mean? And so I think First John speaks to that. Apparently there's hypocrisy in the church, so it might speak to that as well. But I think some of the questions or some of the false teaching that's taking place about the person of Jesus, the idea that Jesus wasn't God, or Jesus was just a good teacher, or he didn't really die on the cross, and the issues concerning the person and the work of Jesus are really big questions today.
Yeah.
I mean, these are questions that I know in our Alpha program we address, but they're questions that constantly come up. Who is Jesus, and why should I follow him? And here's John, and I love this. This is around 85 AD, so it's about 50 years after his witness of Jesus' resurrection. And John, he begins by saying, hey, look, this isn't theoretical. This Jesus, I've seen him. I've heard his voice. I've touched him.
Yeah.
Like I was friends with this guy.
Yeah.
And I was there. So, and I'm getting old. Pay attention. I want to bring you back to first principles again. This is who Jesus is. Don't be looking to other places. It's only in Jesus where we find life. And so he uses the language of Jesus is a word and Jesus is life over and over again, and calling us to love one another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I know, like, before we hit record on the camera, you're talking a little bit about how maybe Gnosticism is at play too. You want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the challenges with the person of Jesus, and not just with the person of Jesus, but just kind of contemporary spirituality. So this thing called Gnosticism has been around forever. And it's basically this idea of that physical things are less important than spiritual things. And we see that in, I won't mention shows, but there's a lot of shows and lots of talk shows about, let's be all spiritual and the bodily things don't matter, because that's just, our bodies are just a shell, and one day our spirit's going to fly away. That whole idea. Well, it's a dangerous idea. It's not a biblical idea, because our bodies matter. And you can go into one of two ditches. And this one of the ditches is, my body doesn't matter. It's all about spiritual things. So I can do whatever I want with my body, including sleep around, do all sorts of abuse to my body, because it's just my body. And spiritual things matter. The other side is that you're so spiritual that you just neglect, you just don't think about the body. And both are ditches that the Bible, not just First John, but the Bible addresses over and over again. Paul, read 1 Corinthians. That's a big issue, even in 1 Corinthians. And so this idea of Gnosticism, and over the weeks we'll unpack this a little bit more, is alive and well. So there's an early writer in the church, a guy named Tertullian, an African church leader, and he said Gnosticism is like a multi-headed hydra. You cut off one head and two more pop up, because it just always shows up. And sometimes in the church, we want to be so spiritual that we forget about the importance of our bodies.
Yeah.
We forget about the importance of caring for bodies, caring for other people. We have, especially in our day and age, we have a pretty strange understanding of our body's relationship to this idea of us.
Yeah.
And I think John's going to address some of those things.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like yesterday, at staff meeting, we were talking about this very
exactly,
thing,
yeah.
Through Ruth Haley Barton's book, Sacred Rhythms, and looking at the chapter on honoring the body, and really getting at this very thing that you're talking about, how it's amazing how so many things in the Christian life we can fall into those two ditches of either the abuse of it or the neglect of it.
Yeah, that's a good way to
And the body is one of those ways, right? So how do we learn to receive our bodies as gifts without idolizing them, without shunning them,
Yeah.
but properly caring for them?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's going to be a fun book. It's going to be a fun read.
Yeah, I think so. I love First John. And so how can we then get the most out of this book as we embark like on this sermon series? How can we like take it for all it's worth?
Oh, I think meditate on it, memorize parts of it. It's not long. Like it takes all of like 7.5 minutes to read. I mean, it's a short book in the Bible. And so what I've been doing is I've just been reading it, or I've been listening to it, because it doesn't take that long even to listen to, and just really soak into what John is saying. And I think it's going to be quite transformative for us as a church.
Yeah. Awesome. Any other big themes that we might hit throughout the book, or do you feel like you've covered them all?
Oh, there's so many things. I mean, in chapter 1, the theme of forgiveness is a big one, but yeah, there's lots of themes that we'll be tackling. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, stay with us in the weeks ahead. But thanks so much, David, for your time in kind of giving us the intro for First John here.
You're welcome.
We hope you enjoyed the teaching today. If you're wanting to follow along with our community group's discussion guide with your group, you can head to cachurch.ca/media, where you can find the discussion guide. Not only are there questions there related to the sermon, but there's also prayer prompts that relate to the passage or the topic that we were talking about, and practices that you can, on an individual level or a group level, begin integrating into your life to not only bring this knowledge into your mind, but to begin living it out.